This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
So, Audrey, you are positively glowing today.
Is that because we're going to talk about nuclear energy?
It must be.
So Singapore is joining a few other countries around the world to explore the potential use of nuclear energy. So I thought that maybe that's a timely peg for us to be talking about why Singapore is even considering that.
Yes, I guess, a lot of people have this image of nuclear power stations as being these huge things. They're going to have big perimeters, and of course people are still worried about nuclear accidents and so forth. But, nuclear energy technology is changing quite quickly.
Welcome to Green Pulse, an environmental podcast series at the Straits Times, where we aim to provide you with a unique Southeast Asian perspective to global environmental challenges. I am Audrey, your co-host.
And I'm David. I'm your other co-host.
Yeah, David, also what you said about changing technologies and also changing considerations among the countries that are using them. But before we get into it, I just wanted to share a fun fact that my parents, which many people will consider being in the boomer generation, are actually not entirely against nuclear plants in Singapore, which I was pretty surprised by actually.
So why is that?
I think that they trust that if Singapore were to make such a decision, that, enough thought and studies will be going into it and that enough assessments have been made before Singapore eventually makes that decision.
Yeah, but I noticed that government they're looking at it quite closely and they're looking at boosting the talent pool and we'll talk about this a bit more, I think, but, they already have cooperation with France and I think the US. So I think what Singapore's doing is, although they haven't made a decision, they're looking at what the neighbours are doing.
Yeah.
And, working towards making a proper, educated decision when they need to.
Yeah, I agree. But we should do a bit of a rewind to talk about this global nuclear renaissance, Singapore's role in it, and also what other countries are considering.
Yes, so I went to the World Nuclear Association website. And there's some surprising figures there. I think there's still an impression that nuclear is kind of in the doldrums, that some stations are still being built, but, and there's growing interest, but there's not much activity. But actually, there are 76 reactors under construction at the moment globally. A lot of those are in China. And there are 437 reactors that are operating globally, which is quite a lot. And nuclear provides nearly 10% of the global share of electricity generation. So it's
How many percent?
9%.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So far from a niche area, I would say.
Yeah, that's not 9% globally is not insignificant. And of that, I think there are some countries that are achieving nuclear in a mix of up to maybe 60-70%, like France. They have significant proportion of their fuel mixes coming from nuclear energy.
So the US tops the list. It has the highest capacity. Yeah, France is number 2. China's number 3 and increasing, I think, faster than most of the others. Then comes Japan, Russia, South Korea. Yeah.
And I'm quite surprised that nuclear has not come under attack by the US president. He has attacked many other forms of clean energy generation, but he has kind of left. He has not really said much about nuclear yet.
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question.
Maybe a bit more about the Singapore context. The last time nuclear was floated as a potential energy option for Singapore was when a study was done back in 2012. And that study at that time said that nuclear energy was not feasible for the country. Full stop. So it took 10 years later, in 2022, that was when nuclear was again floated as a viable option for Singapore in this report that we know as the Energy 50 Committee report. So that report was the one that said that Singapore's energy sector can reach net zero emissions by 2050 and that depending on the geopolitical scenario, nuclear energy could maybe supply, nuclear energy as well as other emerging sources like geothermal could supply up to 10% of the country's energy needs by 2050. So it was that report that I guess started as a turning point for how Singapore considers nuclear energy. And in 2022, another significant global event happened, right? Which is when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Ah, yes, of course. And that sparked a tremendous global energy crunch. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was interesting that all these developments came at the same time. I think that really propelled this discussion, not just on the climate front, but also the energy security front. Especially you have countries like Germany that were so reliant on Russian gas. And after the war broke out, and the supply chains were disrupted, Germany actually said they had to consider reopening its coal plants.
Yeah, and gas prices spiked and there was a mad scramble to find gas. So I think one of the key things for nuclear also is that people have realised that it's not going to power the globe, at least not yet, but it is low emissions, and I think it's an important part of any diversification of energy mix, precisely because if one source of energy is knocked out, or supplies of that, like coal or oil or gas, you at least have something else.
Related to that, nuclear energy is also perceived as a domestic source of energy, right? Countries that do not have nuclear fuel like uranium, they would have to import it. But because the fuel is so energy dense, like 1 unit of the fuel could power your country for quite a long time, quite a long period of time. And that was a point that was raised recently, right? Singapore has a nuclear energy office under the Energy Market Authority, now looking into whether, Singapore could eventually tap nuclear. And that was one point that was raised, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so domestic energy security is a key thing. Singapore's obviously looking at that, as many other countries, and the Ukraine war reminded us of that. So if you're able to generate sufficient energy through your own domestic means without imports, that's, well, I don't know if you call that the Holy Grail, but it certainly provides a better sense of security.
Yeah,
sure.
Definitely. And what does this mean for consumers, like for you and I? It also means stable electricity prices, right? When Russia invaded Ukraine, the energy prices went up. I think the tariff went up like almost twice. I mean, people were paying up to like maybe 15 cents per kilowatt, 15 Singapore cents per kilowatt hour before the crisis. And after that, the electricity tariff here shot up to over 30 cents. So I think having a stable source of electricity or secure source of electricity is definitely a major consideration. But then some people would say, why not just put solar panels around the whole country? I mean, we've heard that a lot. People do mention, and even in other countries, I think some people mention, like, why do we have to go to nuclear, Every time people talk about nuclear, we just remember all these disasters. But I think another point to note is that renewable energy, while it's great and that we should continue working on it, is also extremely intermittent, especially in the tropics.
Yes, but as China and Australia are finding, you can have 24-hour supply with renewables. So, for example, battery storage. I just saw something earlier today that globally, Australia has the world's largest battery storage installations in terms of the grid size. So what's happening is that excess power from wind and solar is being stored in batteries right around the country. And that is providing stability for the grid, but then also power, at night when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow.
So that's where I think geographical context is important because battery storage are important in order to balance some of the intermittency of renewables. I mean, just to kick in here, intermittency in renewables refers to, like, for example, at night when the sun doesn't shine, your solar panels stop generating electricity, and having battery storage systems can help to overcome that. But also battery systems, I think Singapore is looking into that area, but these would also require large amounts of space, right? You would need large batteries in order to accommodate all the fluctuations. And even in Singapore during the day, the sunshine is not equal throughout the day.
That's true.
A lot of clouds, shading from buildings could affect the output. Yeah, so I think that's also one reason why countries are considering nuclear, because it provides that kind of grid stability. Right, you won't have sudden spikes, when the skies are clear and the sun keeps shining down the solar panels, and you also won't see sudden drops, like whether it's at night or when there's a huge cloud passing by and so on.
True. But yes, Singapore's geography is a bit more problematic, unless, of course, it relies on, as it will increasingly do, on its neighbours to bring in renewable energy. And that's where you could also put in battery storage as well. Be it Indonesia, be it Malaysia, or even Indochina.
Yeah.
It's just a way how grids will be configured increasingly, where power is shuffled around much more than it is today. I mean, China's learning to do this because it has so much solar and wind in the west, and they've been building these very high voltage power lines to bring the power to the populated east. But they've also been installing huge amounts of battery storage as well. So as a consequence, they're still building coal-fired power stations, but those power stations are being used less and less. And they're building more and more nuclear. And the good thing about nuclear, I guess, is that can run, or is designed to run sort of 90-95% of the time. So it's constant, it's base load.
Yeah. So I think that, these numerous factors are also fueling the nuclear renaissance, why so many countries around the world are even starting to look at nuclear. We should also tackle the elephant in the room, which I think many people will be curious about, is that do all these benefits negate the historical baggage that people have of nuclear energy?
So I'm agnostic on nuclear. I mean, it's been around since the 1950s. The technology has progressively improved, and there are different designs and different methods of harnessing the nuclear energy that are much safer these days. So the biggest problem, or the two biggest problems with new power plants, most of them anyway, is the cost and the time. Most of the new ones in France, certainly in Britain, Finland and the US, I'm not sure about the ones in China, all gone way over budget and took much longer to build. But these are the first of a new generation, so you'll kind of expect that. So I remember a conversation last year at Davos where the point was made saying, yes, these new plants are more expensive, they take longer to build, but what you're doing is sort of creating a much safer design, which if you can then replicate in a cookie-cutter approach, that will bring down the costs and sort of shorten the time period.
Yeah. So I think these newer designs of the conventional fission reactors is definitely also something to consider. Like you, I am agnostic on power. I mean, I'm agnostic on nuclear as an energy source, but I do think that people should be more open-minded to the fact that technological advances can improve the situation and that we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, I mean, other than the newer forms of conventional fission plants, so the conventional large footprint kind of power stations, another area where Singapore is interested in will be small modular reactors. We have basically categorically ruled out the deployment of large reactors like the ones in Japan or in France and so on. But small modular reactors, which I think have about a third of the power capacity of a regular plant, is of interest to us simply because we are so dense. And also the safety features of these SMRs, as they are known, better. And the emergency radius, if any incidents happen, are much smaller as well.
Yeah, and I think also the thing about nuclear is that, as I said, it's a kind of a key component in a suite of different types of sources of energy. And I think Singapore does need to have more kind of strings to its energy bow, if you like, going forward from wind and solar, battery storage. The fossil fuels, particularly gas, will still be in the mix for a while.
Yeah.
Hydrogen, ammonia.
The energy violin.
Yes.
Or the energy guitar, right?
Or the energy
you
orchestra.
need more than one string to play a tune.
Yeah, and there are some distinct realities that Singapore and many other countries are facing. Is that the population is growing. There's growing electrification, so more EVs. Households are using more electricity, so switching away from gas hobs to electric hobs for cooking. And, of course, data centers and AI are consuming a lot more energy too. So, I think Singapore's energy demand is expected to grow 2 to 5% annually through to 2035, according to the Energy Market Authority. So that power's got to come from somewhere. And if you're going to meet your net zero by 2050 target, well, that's a hell of a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Growing power demand, but at the same time trying to cut your emissions. Well, you can't do it with just one type of power. You've got to do it with that
with the energy violin.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, other than the constraint of carbon, there's also other kinds of constraints, right? Like, the need to keep energy prices affordable. Already, just based on our current fossil fuel infrastructure, we've seen how our energy prices could go up drastically because of supply chain breakdowns. But it's not really clear yet how new energy sources, the distributed energy sources, whether it's from nuclear, from energy imports, from hydrogen, geothermal, could influence the price. And I think that it is still early days because we don't really know whether those energy forms are viable for us to do even a back-of-the-loop calculation, or maybe the government has that I'm not privy to. But affordability is definitely one of the other constraints that we have to deal with.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just look at the concerns about cost of living these days, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think Singapore is going to opt for saying, sorry, guys, but your electricity bills are going to double.
No aircon for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So no, I'm sure the government and the EMA are definitely thinking about this. And yeah, maybe that we're not privy to the plans yet, but I think we can be confident that the Singapore government is thinking about this very carefully.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a strategy that you can see being worked out to try to balance that. But I mean, okay, other than carbon constraints, affordability constraints, energy security, I think as we have discussed in the earlier stages of this podcast, is really the foundations of why so many countries, including Singapore, are now trying to pursue this energy form or explore this energy form as much as possible.
Well, also, Singapore's been heavily reliant on gas imports from Malaysia and Indonesia. And both those countries, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, have said that those supplies will eventually run out. So Singapore's been importing more liquefied natural gas, LNG.
Yeah, we're building our second LNG terminal in order to accommodate these diversified inputs from all over the world. And at the same time, we are also exploring this thing called biomethane. So chemically, it's the same as natural gas, which is our dominant fuel here, but it comes from a kind of like a renewable source, right? Agricultural waste. But this is still very early stages.
Yeah, so isn't that big TWAS mega waste treatment hub is going to generate some biomethane?
TWAS Nexus. But I'm not sure how much biogas that will generate how much of a difference it could make for energy supply. Or maybe that's just meant to power that complex, right? Yeah, I have a feeling most of the biomethane that Singapore is considering for our power plants would be imported from across ASEAN. I mean, I think in the EU, they do have biomethane supply chain already in place. It's just that how can we replicate that in ASEAN? Because ASEAN also there's a large agricultural sector which could potentially be a source of this biomethane.
Yeah, we don't have really the space to bring in lots of cows and sheep.
No, and I'm not sure whether people will want that either.
Oh, no, the smell. No, definitely not. So, so is nuclear safe? Is obviously one of the overarching questions. People see renewable energy as safe.
How do we put this? Are all forms of technology safe? Even an aeroplane or car ride carries risk, right? I mean, we can't bring risk down to zero. But it's about, also when you talk about risk, there's many elements of risk to consider, right? Like the chance of an accident happening. And if an accident happens, how can we prevent damage to people, right? So that's another aspect of like increasing our resilience. So I think that, while a lot of our discussions so far have been on the nuclear technology, which is the reactors themselves and so on, another aspect that we should also look out for is the nuclear safety element, which is that what are the protocols and procedures in place in the country to monitor radioactivity, to alert us in the case of any breaches, and so on. So recently, our colleague Shabana, she actually got an insight into, the Nuclear Radioactivity Lab, which is under the National Environment Agency. So they are the agency that oversees our nuclear safety regime. And it was quite interesting about the types of tests that they have there. The IAEA, the UN Atomic Agency, they do send countries around the world like samples, and these samples are contaminated with small doses of radioactivity. And the aim is really to see whether the national labs can detect these particles and the type of these particles. And Singapore has consistently done well in those studies. Yeah, so, on the nuclear safety framework, Singapore has the capabilities and we are continuing to build on that. So as part of the government reorganization in Singapore that, wants to explore whether Singapore could eventually tap, we kind of have two teams now, one under the Energy Market Authority that looks at the technology, which looks at the, eventual operation of a plant. And then you have the NEA's nuclear team, which focuses more on safety and monitoring, which both are crucial, I think.
Yeah. You have to have, again, like a violin, you've got to have public education, you've got to have nuclear safety protocols, basically a nuclear energy authority to both monitor, to regulate the operators, what to do in a crisis, all of this. And obviously there are protocols, international protocols that Singapore would have to work with as well under the UN, for example.
Yeah. And I think one point that was recently raised in an interview that Hui Shan did with the director of the new EMA nuclear office, I think one point that he raised was that we also need to train our own talent, because right now there's very few people in Singapore who actually have the necessary capabilities to actually know enough about nuclear plant and so on to operate it. So we need to train up our own people in this area. So when it comes to a time where Singapore has to make a decision about whether to deploy, we can trust our own expertise on whether or not it will match, our local constraints.
Yeah, and that's all part of national energy security as well, I would have thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you don't want that talent to sort of, it's good to have foreign talent, obviously, but then there's also the risk that talent might go to another country.
But because you never know, there's too much uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
But if you build up your own local indigenous talents who can, help the country make that assessment, I think it's an additional layer of security that we can tell our people, or we can use to convince people. And actually, speaking of people, let's not forget the importance of getting public buy-in for an emotive topic like nuclear.
Yes, so that same gentleman from the EMA, from that new nuclear task force, he's out there, that's part of his job, isn't it, to educate the public. And he was saying in the story by your colleague Hui Shan, I think.
Yes.
He said that there are all sorts of interesting perceptions out there, that some people think that most of Singapore's energy comes from solar.
Yeah, I was really surprised to hear that. But I was really surprised, but not surprised, So, that people have this misconception.
Well, there are an awful lot of solar panels on HDB estates these days. So, yeah.
That's the thing about energy. It's like you don't really care about where your energy comes from unless you turn on the lights and your light doesn't turn on. You flick on the switch and it doesn't turn on. So yeah, I guess, public understanding of why we need nuclear energy is important. And like Daryl said, he did also mention that, public has to understand Singapore's stance and why our unique geographical, economic constraints are prompting us to even look at nuclear as a potential energy resource.
Yeah.
Lack of renewable energy options here other than solar. We don't have winds, we don't have tidal, we don't have hydropower. So we can only have solar. And even if you cover the whole country in solar panels, I'm not confident that it will be enough to generate all our energy needs.
No, I think isn't it like 10% was the I don't know if that's an old figure or not, but
that was a figure that has been cited a lot, that the maximum we can get is around 10%.
And nobody wants to live in a country covered in solar panels. So much as it idealistically sounds good, you've still got to find another energy source for most of the power. So that's not going to work. And anyway, rooftops, solar panels on reservoirs, there's only so much you can do. Yeah.
And even if, then you might have some people who's asking, then just stick to the status quo. Let's just continue our fossil fuel use. But even then, I think the recent electricity prices spike that after the Ukraine war shows that even the business as usual does not guarantee affordable electricity for everyone. And with the way things are turning out politically around the world, we're not even sure whether fossil fuels would be exempt from all this geopolitical turmoil.
Totally. But now, Audrey, apart from fission nuclear, which is what we've been talking about, that is the splitting of the atom, what about the energy from bringing atoms together? Fusion energy.
Which is the process that takes place on the surface of the sun.
Yes. And it's a very different process with its own set of challenges. Now, fusion energy has been around for quite a while as well, but it's never really... the idea is to basically fuse atomic nuclei, typically hydrogen, to release a huge amount of energy. And so when you smash these sort of atoms or these nuclei together, they can create hot plasma, kind of just like on the sun, right? But you have to contain it. So one fun fact is that 1 kilogram of this super hot plasma, which can be something like 100 or 150 million degrees Celsius, which is quite mind-blowing, can produce 4 million times the amount of energy than burning coal or oil. So any wonder people think that if we can harness this, it's a never-ending source of energy, a bit like, some sort of amazing reactor in a Star Trek spaceship.
Yeah. Fusion definitely has its promise, but I'm not sure whether the timelines for it to come online is compatible with the net zero by 2050 framework that we're all gunning for.
So, there's a lot going on globally now. There's intergovernmental collaborations, such as the one in southern France called ITER, in which China, the European Union, India, Japan, Korea, South Korea, and Russia, and the US, as well, are all... So traditionally, some of these are rivals, but they're all working together or collaborating on this giant project to create the world's largest fusion reactor, which is called a tokamak. And I'm not sure what their timeline is to complete this, but they're well on the way. And then they also have private companies or startups that have attracted billions of dollars in funding, also to build tokamaks, but smaller versions or different types. And they're aiming for into the early 2030s to test their pilot plants. So not very long. But some experts think that commercial or widespread fusion power may not be ready until after 2050 or 2060.
So, I think this is an area that many research groups are keeping an eye out on. But I think in the nearer term, when talk about fission plants or nuclear plants that could come online, of course, you have the conventional fission plants that are already being built right now in South Korea and other countries. And then you have the SMRs, which also have not been commercially deployed. But if you ask me between SMRs and fusion, which one Singapore is banking on, is definitely SMRs.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That SMRs will definitely, I think, come online much earlier. Fusion energy has always been, it's coming soon. But I think there is a lot more momentum. And I think Singapore, the government has picked up on this now. So, it has, SG Innovation, the National Supercomputing Centre are all involved in promoting this and trying to build up a talent pool and also key partnerships. So with France, with the UK Atomic Energy Authority and Japan's Helical Fusion as well. So again, Singapore's very carefully strategizing, trying to build up resources in these key areas, because we want to have that talent to capture that technology, to be part of that, not to play catch up later on, basically.
Yeah. So I think that's a good note to end off on. Maybe we should conclude with our own assessments on nuclear.
Say it more enthusiastically.
For me, I think that it's definitely an interesting area to watch.
Yeah, I think we're in a really exciting time. We've gone from nuclear being in the doldrums, particularly after the Fukushima disaster in 2011, and now it's, I wouldn't say it's absolutely glowing with promise, but I think there's a lot of more considered thought, I think. And like you say, the Ukraine war certainly, I think, sparked a lot of rethinking. I'm personally in favour of nuclear I think fossil fuels are done. I think we'll have to need them for a few more decades. But it's clear that the damage they do to the environment, both in air pollution but also climate change, is just not sustainable. And quite frankly, humans we're clever, right? We're good at research, we're good at science, we're always good at reinventing things. So let's move on to a cleaner type of energy.
Yeah, agreed. So, on that note, that's a wrap for this episode of Green Pulse. I am Audrey Tan.
And I'm David Fogarty. You can email us your thoughts on this episode. Links to our articles and how to connect with us on social media are in our show notes. This episode was edited by Hadju Rahim.
And if you'd like to follow more environmental news from the Straits Times, do follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Green Pulse newsletter. Thanks for listening.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.